throughout, political history, there has been a lot of very intense rivalry. Some of them for, well, justified reasons. You had the whole the Cameron Osborne partnership, and then you had the fact that Boris Johnson absolutely hated them. If you want a glimpse of that, go watch the book club that we've just done on the first chapter. And then you had things like, most recently, you've had the Mordaunt Liz Truss absolute rivalry, which even has spawned over into this weekend's coronation, because as Penny Mordaunt was bearer of the jewel-encrusted sword, and everyone was freaking out about her outfit and everything like that, it's just like, well, it's still Penny Mordaunt, she's still absolutely awful. There was one at least good thing about that, because Penny Mordaunt doing that was basically the metaphorical equivalent of her as if she had walked down the aisle, just completely flipping off Liz Truss as she walked down. Because Penny Mordaunt's position is a reminder of just how much Liz Truss tried to sideline and keep Penny Mordaunt out, or at least on the outside, of all her very short time in Downing Street. And actually, this is one of the big things that also should be noted as well. You had John Major, Tony Blair, and Gordon Brown turn up, and there was pictures, and you could see they were actually sort of, they might not agree politically, but at least they can at least some sort of passing respect amongst them. But then out of the car, you had Cameron, you had Johnson. Well, you had Cameron, May, Johnson, Liz Truss, followed by Rishi Sunak. And this is one of the things that should be highly, highly noted, was every single time we have a state coronation, the annual cenotaph, wedding, funeral, these five will turn up, and it will be a permanent reminder of just the absolute chaos we have seen since 2016, even more for the fact that Liz Truss will probably always turn up to these events as a permanent reminder for decades to come about how she crashed the pound and crashed the economy. And every single time we mention Liz Truss or we see her, she should be reminded of that fact, because we're all living with that and what she did. So we're going to do more digging into this, because this is once again a fantastic story, because just as Penny Mordaunt was the leader of the Unionist and Conservative Party, or at least the Unionist faction in the Conservative Party, Liz Truss was obviously the opposite faction, and there was no love lost between them, certainly during the leadership contest. And of course, Liz Truss put her on the out to try to keep her out. But this is almost Mordaunt's victory in this regard. And to be honest, the story of this is just hilarious. And so certainly one that should be noted. So even if you were not a fan of like Penny Mordaunt or the coronation or anything like that, just take this moment to bask in this opportunity that this was one of the biggest bird flipping moments in British political history. So, before we go talking into more about this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And of course, as always, there is the Pony Club and the YouTube thank you button down below as well. So, let's crack on into the eye. See what they've got, because they were covering this. And like I say, it just goes to show you the severe rivalry that happened on this. So, a penny, or should that be penny, for the thoughts of Liz Truss as she watched the coronation ceremony from inside Westminster Abbey. While the UK's shortest-serving Prime Minister was pinned into her pew along with hundreds of other guests, the woman she once tried to sideline was busy stealing the show as Charles III was crowned king. Penny Mordaunt, whose day job is Leader of the House of Commons and Lord President of the Privy Council, has now added Bearer of the Jewelled Sword of Offering to that list. Carrying the gigantic blade is one of the responsibilities of the President of the Privy Council, a government job which in normal times doesn't attract much attention. It was not supposed to be like this, of course. Back in early September, when Liz Truss became Prime Minister, Queen Elizabeth II was still alive, and the new PM was trying to impose her authority on her cabinet. At the time, it was expected that Mrs. Mordaunt would be given a top job in government after a very bitter battle last July between the two women to be in the last two of the Conservative leadership contest against Rishi Sunak. The MP for Portsmouth North eventually backed Mrs. Truss to win, in what was seen as a pivotal moment in which helped her former rival win the Tory crown. But in Miss Truss's reshuffle of the 6th and the 7th of September, it emerged that Mrs. Mordaunt had been offered Northern Ireland Secretary, which, an important role, is not a great office of state. She turned it down. She was instead given Leader of the House of Commons and Lord President of the Privy Council, and friends of Mrs. Mordaunt insisted she had chosen the job. But it was clear that Miss Truss had sidelined her rival by overlooking her for a more senior role to what would have suited her. Such was either the Foreign Secretary or a reprise as Defence Secretary. Leader of the Commons is regarded by some to be a second or even third tier cabinet post. When Tony Blair sacked Robin Cook as Foreign Secretary in 2001, he demoted him to the Commons leader in a very similarly deliberate sidelining. In fact, Mr. Cook flourished in the job and was considered a very fine parliamentarian. 2 years later, when he resigned as the Commons leader over the war in Iraq, it was on a point of principle rather than out of any sense of revenge. But it showed how the job of Commons leader is the one that can be seized upon by MPs who are put there to be quiet. It is not a role where someone can hold sway over major government policy, which is similar aplomb Miss Mordaunt had then led her into the Commons leader. Nobody could have known possibly quite what happened when 48 hours later, after she was given the job on the 8th of September, the Queen died. Mrs. Mordaunt was then thrust into the heart of important processes by handing power over to the new king. On the 10th of September, as President of the Privy Council, Miss Mordaunt became the first woman in UK history to proclaim a new monarch. Her roles in today's coronation ceremony was even more spectacular, carrying what looks like an exceedingly heavy gold and bejeweled sword in front of the world of audience of hundreds of millions, might face the less robust members of Parliament, but not a Royal Navy reservist and even a reality diving show contestant. Mrs. Mordaunt's outfit also ended up grabbing attention, and it is not an inconsiderable task when you're in a room with all those golden and ermine cloaks. It turns out the MP helped to design her own dress and hat, and of course a fern motif of the Privy Council stitched in gold thread. Revenge is too strong a word when today's events could not have possibly been foreseen back in early September. But perhaps a sort of soft karma may have crossed Truss's mind as she looked on from her pew. So it's really, really petty. But I think this is worth generally covering because no one knew what events were going to happen at that point. And I've always said, and I will maintain, that if Liz had not died, if she'd hung on for 2 or 3 more weeks, Liz Truss, as time as Prime Minister, would have been even shorter. It would have been even shorter. And I will maintain that forever. It was only because of the death of the Queen that she managed to get an extra, couple of days in. If not, she'd have lasted even shorter. But I'll tell you now, this sort of being sidelined into this position, I think this would absolutely be monumental revenge against Liz Truss, especially as we know that there is absolutely no love between these two women whatsoever. They are still, what we know, in very, very much a political rival. Like I say, Penny Mordaunt and Liz Truss, both representing completely different factions of the Tory party. And remember, we are still in a civil war, and that still refuses to blow over. Because remember, you've got both Boris Johnson and Liz Truss were both taken out by the factions that now represent Rishi Sunak. And they're both in Parliament. And trust me, they are not going to remain quiet after this absolute disaster of a local election result. And especially probably the increasing worry that has swept through the Tory party. Like I say, the coronation might have maybe kept it down, but trust me, on Sunday and this week, we are going to hear it non-stop. So strap yourselves in, because this might be a very bumpy week and a very lot of angry, annoyed, and upset Tories, which, oh, bliss. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.